Hey all, I have someone that's going to join. I'm going to let them into the meeting here, and they claim to be someone that got themselves circumcised or preputially amputated as an adult, and they're happy. So we're going to find out why they're happy and their thoughts and ask a ton of questions. Hi, Nathan, can you hear me? Oh, you're connecting to audio. Hi, Nathan, can you hear me? I can't hear you. You're on mute. Nathan? Oh, looks like it's coming in a different way here.
How's it going? Okay.
Hi, Nathan. Okay, so I need to remove your other connection here.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. I had to enable my microphone.
No worries. Well, thank you so much for joining, and I'm really interested in hearing your story to learn about it. So on TikTok, you claim to have gotten yourself preputially amputated or circumcised as an adult.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
tell us.
All right, so I became sexually active at 16, and I never really knew the difference, circumcised or uncircumcised, and never really had the talk about like needing to pull the skin back beneath the head in order to have sex or intercourse or whatever. We were using condoms at the time, so it wasn't really relevant. I wasn't actually pulling the skin back to have intercourse, and so I was just putting the condom on over it. And so for the first 2 years of our relationship with my girlfriend at the time, it was never an issue. I never really had an issue with it. She ended up getting on birth control later on, and the problem is that it was painful to pull the skin back beneath the head. Just the skin wouldn't stretch all the way, so I couldn't do that. And then the frenulum was short. So what ended up happening is that it tore, and there was no repairing it. Like basically at that point, if the frenulum gets torn, then it's not ever going to go back right. It's just not ever. You have to get circumcised basically at that point.
No.
But okay, though, that's fine. But it was going to happen again if it was the length that it was, or it was always going to be an issue. The size of my foreskin was never going to change. It was always going to be painful to pull it back. Like that was always going to be an issue. So
okay, so you had phimosis and you had frenulum breve, right? And it sounds like you didn't get it treated before you got a tear, right?
Sure.
Okay, so with phimosis, 97% of cases are treatable without any kind of cutting at all. You understand that? Have you looked at the statistics on that?
No, I have not. After, it's something that I had thought about as a kid as like, getting it done already. So I wasn't opposed to it. I was like, why not? And like my experience after getting circumcised is that like, I don't know, I've watched a lot of your videos and you talked about sensation in the tip of your foreskin, or the sensation in the tip of the penis or something like that.
Yeah.
And that there's virtually no change between sensation of having sex with the foreskin and without the foreskin. I'd say that there's no notable difference. The only notable difference is that it's probably easier to have sex now. And it's probably more
to a certain extent, I can understand that. Yeah.
So like, and I had a full 2 years of having sex with foreskin. So I really don't. I honestly, I can only say that it was less of something to deal with because of the pain. So
okay, were you able to identify your ridged band before you got your prepuce removed?
No.
Okay, so wish I had a thing. I think I'm going to get one. I just got an email earlier saying that someone's going to send me an image. You take an adult prepuce and cut it off, and then you spread it out, and you can see where the frenulum would connect the inner mucosa, the ridge band, and then the outer layer. Right. So that would be the part right here at the very end, and it's also the part that it squeezes closed to act like a one-way sphincter. Right. So it allows things out like urine and stuff like that, but doesn't. It's not supposed to let things get back in. Right. Unless you're pulling back. But if you pull back, then you should clean before things go back to natural. Right. So
Right.
and from intact men that I've spoken to, that ridge band, when it's got these special nerves that like being stretched. So because of the shape of the glands, right? It's it's kind of cone shaped. It causes that skin, that ridge band, to stretch out as it's coming down on the over the glands, and that process itself is an erogenous feeling in itself. Okay, so I take it you didn't have that?
No, I didn't have any experience of like needing anything to do with my foreskin, at all. Like I can't think, it's never, this whole conversation has never occurred to me to have, because I didn't see any negatives or downsides to getting circumcised. And like, I wasn't, brought into the circumcision community until I had boys, and I had 3 boys, and I didn't want them to ever have any of the issues that I had. And so I, was in the room with them, and we had a natural with the first one, and then we had plastic belts with the last 2, and we went to a specialist every single time. And I know that for a while there, I think with my first child, that doctors didn't recognize it as something, and so insurance didn't cover it, so we had to pay out of pocket. But then later on, they changed it, and they changed it. Well, now they do recommend it, so then it became covered again. So we definitely went through both. And then so I saw one of your other videos where like people associate this whole conversation with like, all right, well, if you don't circumcise your children, do you vaccinate your children? And we don't vaccinate, and we had a home birth for our last child. We had a a birth center for our middle child, and a hospital birth for our first child. So every experience of like outside communication was like, we had every experience of like suggestions or whatever. And so, there was nobody like saying, oh, you have to do this to your kids or whatever. And so I feel like there's a lot of content out there that's like, people get pressured into having a circumcision, but like, none of the 3 ways. I've never heard somebody, you should circumcise your kids. I've never heard that.
Oh yeah, 94% according to Intact America of hospitals push the practice. They push by just asking several times. They'll ask like 8 times on average or something like that, according to the survey that was done. But back to what happened with you. Do you know whether you were retracted while you were young at all?
I wasn't very like, no, I don't. I mean, yeah, a few times, like I did it, obviously, but
No, not you doing it yourself, not retracting yourself as a youngster. I'm talking about when you were like an infant, a toddler, young ages, particularly when your diaper is being changed. Did anyone forcefully retract to expose your glands in order to clean it?
I don't really know. My mother did it as a. My
So you
mother
haven't had the conversation.
No, her decision on doing it or not doing it had nothing to like. It's just her personal preference. Like she didn't actually like. So thinking like whether or not she did any research on what you have to do if you do circumcise, or what you have to do if you don't circumcise, like I'd probably say it never happened because she didn't care either way.
Okay, so forceful retraction though of an intact boy can damage the intact boy and lead to problems like you were dealing with as an adult, right? So for example, the inner mucosa and the glands is adhered, very similar to your fingernail, is adhered when when you're a baby. I have 2 intact teenage boys. I saw this firsthand. And if you look at one of my older videos where John Geishiker from Doctors of Circumcision does a presentation at a baby expo, he actually shows several videos where people are pulling down on the skin, and that ridged band and that prepuce is holding on for dear life to that penis. Okay. And what happens is people, I don't know how this has happened, but I guess it's just because it's become such a normal thing to have that glands exposed that people think that they have to expose it to clean it, because they've been taught somehow that even with babies, it's going to be dirty inside, and it's not. Just like it's not dirty in the fingernail bed of your fingernail, right? So leave it alone, just clean it like a finger, wipe base to tip, and you're good. So unfortunately, there's been too many, and I hear this so often that nurses tell people to forcefully retract, break it. I even saw a tweet one time from a daycare worker that, complained that, everyone should just get their babies circumcised, because then they won't have to go through this pain that they go through every time I change a freaking diaper, because they scream like crazy every time I change a diaper and I pull it back to clean. It's like, you're not supposed to pull it back. That's what's causing the damage. And you understand how scar tissue works, right?
Sure. And when it comes back, it grows in a different way, different size.
Yeah, and it doesn't. You don't have the same nerves there, and it's not stretchy like the original skin. So, if you imagine, you're getting scar tissue in your ridged band, the part that's supposed to keep things closed. Therefore, phimosis, because it's not able to stretch anymore because the scar tissue built up there and it's keeping it closed. And you have scar tissue on the inner mucosa and the glands, because that's all been torn. You get all these micro tears, and then scar tissue builds up. And then you don't have the feeling that other guys have that weren't forcefully retracted.
I understand what you're saying. Like the only thing that I have is that I, have experienced life both ways. That like,
well, you're saying you've experienced both ways, but it doesn't sound to me like you experienced it with a normal, natural, healthy prepuce. You've experienced it with one that was damaged somewhere along the way when you were little, and you haven't talked to your mother to find out whether that actually happened or not. So you don't really know. So you don't really know both ways. You know your way. You don't know the way of the normal intact men that haven't had damage done.
Right, but I feel like I'm missing the point there, because then it's like, all right, do you circumcise to not have this issue at all, or do you not circumcise and then you have this issue? Like, if like it accidentally happening or something, and then like you're saying it accidentally happens that easily, and then you're circumcised because you tear that whatever, and then you can't experience life uncircumcised, then it's like, all right, just get circumcised then. I mean, if we're talking about that, it's like that close, and that's my problem. It's like my frenulum was that close to being torn all the time, and like it was that close to being pulled down. I'm like, all right, just get circumcised. Like like I don't have to think about anything going on down there right now, and so it's like, all right, I guess, from a doctor's point of view, it's like you have to educate everybody thoroughly on one. But again, if it accidentally happens,
it's easy.
Right.
It's really
Right.
easy. It's really easy to take care of an intact penis. I've changed diapers of my own sons, and I've changed diapers of boys that were cut. And it's easy. It was easier with them because I didn't have to deal with putting on any Vaseline, any of this sort of stuff to keep the inner mucosa from re-adhering to the glands. Right? If you go out to circumcisionharm.org, and you can look at some horrific pictures of things that go on. One of the things that goes on that's very common is skin bridges, because again, I was explaining how the inner mucosa and the glands are adhered. So when you do this, when you cut it all off, and there's a little bit of inner mucosa still left over here, and the baby goes to sleep or whatever overnight, 7, 8 hours, maybe if you're lucky.
Right.
And I haven't had that experience with babies sleeping, straight through, but I would typically go through the night without changing my son's diapers. And the penis, it shrinks and grows. So it shrinks, and then what's left over of the mucosa comes up and touches the glands, and the body reacts. It's like, oh, hey, here's an opportunity to heal. And it creates that scar tissue between the inner mucosa and the glands. And in some cases, you just see this whole ring of where it's reattached itself to the glands, and that has to be surgically cut off again, or re-circumcised is the way they put it sometimes, or they just get stuck with it that way. There's men that get stuck with little skin bridges, and what it does is it jumps from their glands down to the inner mucosa, and then there's like a space in between underneath the sulcus that they have to clean out with a Q-tip. Now, we're talking about, a lot of people say, well, let's do it for hygiene, but you've got these guys that have to do this extra step with a freaking Q-tip to clean it out.
I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying there aren't botched circumcisions. I'm just saying that.
Whether you call that botched or not, I mean, is it botched because of the person that did the cutting, or is it botched because of the person that didn't, do this part right?
Right.
I mean, you've got 10 days or so, 2 weeks, maybe longer, before it's all done healing.
Right. I mean, it was definitely a conversation that we had to definitely get somebody that knew what they were doing every single time. So I think most of the time it is doctors, just not caring if they've done it like 1,000 times. They don't care, 1,001 times leading up to it. And so I think most of the time it is botched circumcision when there's an issue. I think there's just a lack of care, or like, you're a patient for an hour or whatever, and then like you're you for the rest of your life. So I think that the importance in talking to like a professional and getting somebody that cares to do it is, another aspect.
Maybe, or we could just teach people how to care for the intact, normal, natural.
Right, but we've already had that
conversation, and then we don't have to worry about cutting anything at all, and not taking any kind of risk of blood loss or hearing loss because of screaming. There's so many risks to the cutting. In fact, when you look at the risks of the procedure are actually higher than the risk that you'll ever need it done in the future at all.
Right, but your biggest defense on whether or not I know whether or not I've had sex not being circumcised and circumcised is that like something can accidentally happen to me, and then I went my entire life not knowing. It's like, so then we're going back to like, okay, if that's the argument, then like, oh, there is no argument. I mean, if you're saying it can accidentally happen, I can tear the ridge, and like then I'm just as numb, and then I've been numb the entire time. Then like,
well, you'd be numb in one part of the ridge, right? You'd be numb where the tear happened, not the rest of it.
I'm just saying.
I could break one of my toes on my feet, and my toe won't ever grow back, right? And it might feel weird for the rest of my life, but the rest of my toes are still there, right?
Right. I'm just saying that there was no kind of special sensation that I needed, or that I ever thought of, or that I even targeted as like, oh, I need this to enjoy sex better. Like that was never like it. Yeah. Until I started watching videos of other people talking about, I'm like, you're probably romanticizing it. Is honestly like
me romanticizing what?
Not being circumcised. Like,
okay, so I'm not romanticizing it. There's men like the guy that started this. There's Samuel Carnes, another guy that I interviewed that wrote now 2 books on the topic. And there's several intact men that are involved in the movement that have explained how things work when things are normal and healthy there. So I'm not romanticizing it. These are men that are talking about. And if you look at my interviews, you'll also see Nikos Koutsouras and at least 1 or 2 other men that like were cut as adults that had healthy prepuce and really hated that they got cut later on. So I don't know how you could just be saying that I'm romanticizing it when I've got, word of mouth, I mean, directly from the horse's mouth, experiences from lots of intact men. I've got over 100 some intact men in a group on Facebook that address any kind of question that I throw at them in detail about how things work.
Right. I understand what you're saying, but you're literally talking to someone that knows both ways.
You know damaged prepuce and no prepuce. You don't know healthy prepuce.
You know what my penis looks like, or that
but you explained. You already said that you had phimosis and you had frenulum breve. That's not natural, normal, healthy.
I said that my mother didn't know anything about anything. She probably didn't think anything of it at all. I've never said.
I'm talking about what you told me as how things were when you were 16 years old. Right. You said that you couldn't pull things back, which is phimosis. And you also had frenulum breve. Both of those are not, that's expressing a medical indication for your prepuce. So that tells me that you didn't experience a healthy prepuce with sex before you decided to get your prepuce removed.
That's all fine and everything. I guess then I guess I could, go into the line of being like, all right, if everything happened perfect as a child and everything keeps happening perfectly with sex, that like this will never happen and I'll experience the best sex ever of my life. Like I can, but again, I'm romanticizing the idea. It's like I have to think that everything's always gone perfect, in that area, and that it's never been pulled back, even as a young child or as an adult or whatever. However it gets damaged, and then it became less sensitive. Is weird. We're getting to the point where the chances of somebody actually going through life and not, in your words, being damaged, uncircumcised or circumcised is it's 1 in a million. And it's sure, okay, but you're saying that people don't know how to care for uncircumcised penises, so they keep damaging the uncircumcised.
This is in cutting cultures, yes.
And
cutting cultures like the USA.
I'm saying damaged uncircumcised penises. Yeah, not getting a circumcision and then damaging it already. So it's either you're saying that you're damaged because you're uncircumcised, or that you get circumcised and then you're damaged. There has to be an answer that isn't you're damaged for being circumcised or you're damaged for being uncircumcised. There has to be one. There has to be one, and it cannot be either of those.
So what I'm hearing is there's two options that you're suggesting here. Either keep on cutting children's genitals, particularly boys, because there's a high chance that people that are caring for them will damage those genitals anyways, or teach people how to care properly for the normal, natural, intact genitalia. I say let's teach people so everyone can keep what they were born with.
It's even if you teach, the problem is that even if you tell parents not to do it, if a boy doesn't do it to himself or whatever at 5 years old, it's
boys won't hurt themselves down there on purpose. They won't.
If you're saying that it's so fragile that you pulling back to clean it does it, and a boy won't pull back to clean it, I'm on his own in his room, cleaning his own, that's my problem. It's you're literally you can tell all the parents all you want, but it's not theirs, obviously. So they're not always around to be hey, don't pull it back to clean it. And
you don't tell your kids not to pull back to clean it. They'll do that on their own.
Okay, so I'm saying that the extent that you're saying that parents are doing it to the kids, which is supposed to care for the kid, and the extent that the kid would do it to themselves is identical. So I'm saying either it doesn't happen and it's not true that you can I'm saying that it's not a valid argument. It's not. It can be another option. It can be personal preference that you think that people can have better sex if they're uncircumcised. But it cannot, it's so, like I said before, it is such a small pocket that you're like deciding to go after this tiny little pocket. And it's
Tiny
just
little, I'm not following. Tiny little pocket of what?
that the kid won't get damaged on his own, which is your term is the damage term. I'm
Okay,
saying that, like,
so most of the boys in the world don't get damaged. Most of the boys in the world are intact. It's only in places like the United States and Islamic countries and Judaism countries, right? And even in Israel, the numbers have been going down. And there's actually intactivist groups in Israel, of all places, advocating for boys to be left intact. The biggest challenge is to get people educated on how they're supposed to leave things alone when they're intact. You go to places in Europe, you go to places in Japan, you go to places in Russia, you go to China, you go to South America, all these places where boys are normally left intact, and these boys aren't getting damaged. And the percentage of men that are in those countries that end up having to get circumcised later on because of damage is extremely small. So it's possible here in the US to do the same thing if we can educate people how to leave the genitalia the way it's supposed to be without forcefully retracting. Unfortunately, it's a monumental task, particularly in the United States, because even our medical textbooks fail to talk about the prepuce and how it's formed and how it works, and to not, pull it back and stuff like that. They're often, if you read them, they also often seem very biased towards cutting that off.
I believe you. I just, like, even if I had seen all the videos, even if I'd watched everything, I still would have made the same decisions. Like, even after this conversation, I still would have made the same decisions for my boys because
Well,
of my.
I hope that your boys are okay with that when they get old enough and they learn about how things are supposed to function. How hopefully they don't end up with things like scrotal webbing, or curvatures because things are too tight one way or the other.
I'm
And
pretty sure they'll be fine. I think that if you're going to go after birth practices, it's probably people pressuring mothers into having C-sections, like, to get them out of there. That, like, if you're going to, like, spend time going after birth practices, it's probably that one. Like, you're killing more mothers than, like, worrying about this issue. This is just not the damaging effects of having a hospital birth is, like, astronomical. I mean, they're horrible people. Like, doctors, horrible people.
Yep.
Like, they're literally the scum of the earth. Like, they want to get you in there and have you pop a baby out and get you out of there. And, like,
all about money.
I just, I can't. I mean, I feel more about that like, people should know that they're going to be bullied by their doctors on birth practices, and, like,
that's why more and more people are going to
right. I feel like
doulas and
educate people. I
midwives
feel
and all
like
that.
people should know, but I feel like I think people would still decide to circumcise. I honestly do, but that could be my bias on the whole thing, and I'm fine with that. But again, like, sure, tell everybody, tell the world, but there's worse practices to mothers than this is ever going to be an issue.
I understand there may be other issues that are more big than this, but this is something that I happen to have studied long enough to be able to discuss it in detail with a lot of nuance, because again, I'm a cut dad of 2 intact teenage boys, and I've done a lot of freaking research because I wanted to absolutely make sure that I made the right decision by leaving them intact. And I've got a whole freaking bookshelf and a half about the topic.
Right.
So this is why I talk about this topic, because I think that it's important to educate people about it. And I see connections between male genital cutting and intersex genital cutting, or intersex normalization surgeries, and female circumcision or katana or katan or calves or whatever you want to call it. It's all connected. When you look at the roots of it, where they came from, the history of it all comes together. And as long as we keep cutting boys, these countries that cutting girls, they're going to slap at us like, you guys are still cutting boys. Why would we listen to you guys? So, and this is what I hear. So let me ask you a couple other questions about how things are different now. I've normally heard that the inner mucosa and the glands, is moist. There's like built-in lubrication.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have that before and not have it now? Do you even have any coverage?
No, nothing's covered now, and
Even when you're flaccid?
no, yeah, even when I'm stale flaccid, nothing's covered.
Okay.
Like there's been a couple times when like it's extreme cold temperatures, but that's it, and then it's like only for a second, and like it's very noticeable, and then it's like, within a minute, I'm like, all right, I gotta adjust. But as far as erections go, there's no angle, there's no stretching, there's the correct length, and but the dryness, it's just the texture of lips. I would say it's like that, as long as you stay hydrated, that it'll always be the texture of lips.
So it's smooth. It's smooth, like lips that aren't chapped.
Right.
Still?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is another picture you can find on circumcisionharm.org. You see two penises. They're side by side. They're showing two things, two differences. One is you see that the one that was cut as a baby is dry and rough, and the other one is smooth and shiny. And also the ureter, the meatus, is smaller on the one that was cut and bigger on the one that was not. Now, when you're cut as an adult, chances are you don't have meatal stenosis of any sort, any form, right? You understand what I mean by meatal stenosis?
You're saying, is that the ridge?
Nope. Nope. Okay. The meatus is the part where the urine comes out.
Okay.
Okay. And personally, I had a form of meatal stenosis that involved a little skin bridge I jumped across. I don't know how it happened, but I started peeing weird. So, urine went all over the place. My grandmother had, fit about it. So she took me to the doctor, and the doctor just went in there and snipped it.
That I will say that the peeing is much more enjoyable after being circumcised than not. I never considered that as like a topic of conversation or whatever, because like it would stay closed or whatever for a second and then just shoot out everywhere. Being uncircumcised, it was like that.
So
but being circumcised, it was definitely there's definitely an easier experience to go to the bathroom every single time. There are things like that that's just like daily stuff that like it is actually easier to just pee.
So would you pull back during urination, or would your prepuce?
Oh, no, like nobody talked to me about any of this. Like nobody like explained anything. Nobody said anything. Like, so yeah, like that. It probably, like, honestly, I think it was the opposite. It just never got pulled back enough, and that's probably why it was never stretched out. And that's probably why I couldn't fully retract it. And so,
well, some boys have ballooning, right? You know what ballooning is?
No.
Okay. So again, because the ridge band is kind of tight, right? And the urine comes out of the meatus from the glands faster than it escapes the
right.
That. So then you end up with ballooning, where the urine pops up inside and it expands the prepuce until all it releases everything. So it's kind of like going from one bladder to another in a way. And it's okay for that to happen. And part of the reason why that's happening is because the synechia inside has already started to break down. So you have extra space in there for the ballooning to occur. So,
I probably experienced that beforehand.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of tongue tie?
No.
Okay, so tongue tie is very similar to frenulum breve, right? My oldest was actually born with it. It's funny, but it was a little scary and sad at first too. His tongue would look like a fork because the frenulum underneath his tongue was holding his tongue way back inside his mouth. So he wasn't able to latch for breastfeeding. So we took him to the doctor the very next day, and he went in there, and it was just a quick snip. No tissue actually removed, just a snip to release that frenulum of the tongue, and then his tongue just popped straight out right away. So, usually I'm not completely clear exactly about the frenulum. I know that the prepuce is a double folded tissue, and then the frenulum stretches down and it grabs a hold of that inner mucosa, and it acts like an anchor and pulls things back up, much like frenulum kind of acts like a tongue.
Right. Yeah. It
tongue.
almost looks exactly the same. Less webbing than under the tongue, but it's more of like just a rope or something holding the foreskin to the head. But yeah, I definitely don't miss anything about being uncircumcised. Honestly,
I don't imagine you do, because it doesn't sound like you got to experience the healthy one, the healthy prepuce. So, you have anything else to
no,
bring up or anything?
no.
Well, thanks for answering the questions, and thanks for sharing.
All right, thank you very much, man.
Have a good day, Nathan.
You too.